Okay, it is 12:02. I still see some people rolling in through the waiting room, so I'll continue to admit them as they come in, but we'll go ahead and get started with our presentation today because we do want to keep it short so everyone can just enjoy it over their lunch break. So thanks for joining. My name is Carissa Chuka with Results Repeat. Today, our SEO manager, David Tischler, is going to be walking you through some important factors that will help your site rank in organic searches. So I got a chance to preview the presentation yesterday. It's really awesome. I really look forward to him sharing it with you. A couple quick things before we dive in. We've done these lunch and learns. If this is your first one and you want to look back at some of the ones we've done before, we have them all on our YouTube page. So please feel free to peruse those. There's a lot of good information there. We'll also be posting a recording of this one there. So if you want to reference back to something that David mentions, you'll be able to do that. Also, we'll be sending out a survey asking you and all of our customers and friends what topics you're interested in the future. So please look out for that survey and let us know if you have any burning marketing questions that we can help you with. And then last thing, everyone here, you probably noticed, is muted. That's intentional so that we can all hear David and all the good information he has to share. That said, we do want to have a really good Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for David, pop those into the chat box and we will address all of them at the end. So without any further information from me, I will hand the reins over to David for his awesome SEO presentation.
All right. Thank you, Carissa, and thank you all for joining us for vital SEO factors that will help your site rank. So we're going to jump right in, and let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. Okay? My name is David Tischler. I have been in SEO and digital marketing since roughly 2004, so somewhere like 17 years. I hold certifications in search engine optimization fundamentals, technical search engine optimization. I am a Google Power user for analytics, and I also have a certification in advanced conversion optimization. So my alma mater is New York Institute of Technology, and I work with all of the Google properties. And just a little background on the clients I've worked with. I've done hundreds of websites, everything from enterprise level to mom and pop shops. So you probably recognize this definition of SEO, or search engine optimization, as I borrowed it from Kevin's last lunch and learn, but it doesn't change. So what we're going to talk about here is essentially that SEO is essentially improved visibility in the search engines, which means better rankings for your site. And what we got in our survey recently was quite a few questions about, is there a magic trick or magic bullet? So the answer to that question is kind of. The magic comes in really understanding Google's mindset. So we ask, why does Google do the things it does? Why did they make so many changes? And I know what you're thinking here. The answer is not world domination. But in all seriousness, what they do look for is to give the most relevant answer to any given search query or question that people put in when they search on Google. And also secondary to that is to ensure that the user experience is a positive one. So in order to do that, they have a series of algorithms that looks at more than 200 factors on your website. Now, I'm going to go through this screen rather quickly. This information will be in the chat box, and also I'll make this deck available for anybody who wants it. You can email me after. But these are some of the blogs and forums that I keep up to date on the latest changes with Google and that. And again, I'm flying through this, but we'll make sure you have the information. So back to the presentation here, when we ask where's the magic, it really comes down to being able to answer these 4 questions. So do I understand the search queries that drive visitors to my site? So do we know which key terms, keywords, and key phrases they're using to find you? Do I provide the most relevant and up-to-date information to answer those queries? If I do that, do I do it better than my online competitors? And it's really important to realize that your online competitors may be different than your real world competitors, because we're talking about a different venue. So it may not be the same as people who have a storefront near you. And then the fourth question here is, does my website address all of the factors that Google considers the most important? And don't worry, we're going to get into that right now and explain what those are to you. So let's get started with the fundamentals. So I mentioned that there's over 200 ranking factors that Google looks at. So in order to rank or to be seen or found, you have to meet these criteria. And if you can't be found, then nobody's ever going to visit your site. So we're going to take this in sections. And the first section here is crawlability. And then we're going to talk about indexability, accessibility, load speed, and security. And then once we get through those, we're going to touch on rankability and conversions. Now, these are some of the tools that I use: Screaming Frog, SEMrush, Google Analytics. I will definitely make those available. Like I said, make the deck available for you, but those will help you in doing that. So let's start with crawlability. So if your site can't be crawled, if Google spiders or robots can't go through and follow all the links on your page and understand the content that's there, then it's not going to get indexed. Nobody's going to be there. So one common mistake I see here a lot, and this is horrible, because a simple backslash can keep your entire site from being indexed by Google in what's called a robots.txt file. And you can see I've got an example of that up here. The thing is, a lot of web developers will put this in there while they're building the site, so it doesn't get seen while it's under construction. And then oftentimes it gets overlooked. It could also be done with partial files and things like that. So we can get into that a little bit further, but you have to make sure your site can be seen. So even after your URLs have been crawled, there are a couple of things that prevent the search engines from reading and understanding the content there. One of these things is called a no index tag. And then some of the other things we're going to talk about here is canonical issues, duplicate content, and then again, the no index, no follow. So a canonical issue, let me explain it like this. Google sees the www version of your website and the non-www version as two different websites. So if you don't use a canonical tag to tell them which site you prefer, you're now going to compete, have duplicate content, and it will dilute the power of the content on your site. So you want to make sure that that's all in order. The same can be said of the HTTPS or secure version and the non-secure version. And we're going to get into that in a little bit in the next screen. So really important to make sure that you address these. We can get into more detail. If you have any questions, you can always reach out. And the next thing I want to talk about here is accessibility, load speed, and security. Now, just a little caveat here. When I talk about accessibility, I am referring to accessible to the search engine crawlers. This has nothing to do with the user accessibility and does not address the Americans with Disabilities Act. But I will be touching on that in a later slide. So you just want to keep in mind, this is so the websites can access the information on your site. Let's talk about SSL certificates or security certificates. So if your site's not secure, and I'm sure many of you have seen this page come up before, it means your connection is not private. You don't have the SSL things. People run away from these pages, and that's going to affect your rankings. It's one of the things that Google indirectly looks at as far as where to consider you in the rank. So more and more, you have to have the SSL up there. Now, if any link or picture or any link to another site on your website is listed as the HTTP version, then potentially you will get the little not secure thing in the upper left-hand corner of your Google Chrome browser, but not this big screen. However, it still has kind of the same effect. So we want to make sure you're addressing that. The other important factor here we want to talk about is page load speed. And there's a lot of things that go into that, mostly image compression and scaling. So images, as you all know, are big files. They can take a long time to load up to the server to the point where people can see them. By using image compression in WordPress's case, some plugins or compressing it on a website and then loading it up on your site, it will definitely help with the speed. Scaling is one of those things. So let's say you have an image that's 2,000 pixels by 3,000 pixels, but you choose to display it as 200 pixels by 300 pixels. So your website now has to upload that entire image, which is a much heavier file. So if you scale it and compress it before you put it up there and make sure all your images are that way, it's going to be much faster and a much more positive experience for the user, which, as you recall, is one of the primary factors that Google looks at. So these other factors are also important to speed. We can get into the technical side of this a little more if we have a one-on-one conversation, but this has to do with JavaScript and CSS parsing and minification, which essentially means ordering the code so that it loads in a way that's going to be the most efficient. gzip compression is something that is on the server side of your website, so you'll talk to your host about whether they have that enabled. And then browser caching and content delivery networks are ways that your site can be partially preloaded so that when somebody does actually visit it, they get some information from the browsers and the servers that create the web, and it comes on much faster. And then that refreshes after time. So it always has a new version up there. Right? So that's really what it takes to get crawled and indexed so that Google sees your site and you make sure that it's getting up there fast. But now that that's happened, let's talk a little bit about how it ranks and how people can find it. And ultimately, we want them to click on it, click through, and convert. So addressing the first quality here, we're talking about rankability. So this comes down to understanding the needs of your audience, how they consume the content, and are you answering all their needs and pain points, all the vital pieces. So the way that search engine optimization helps with this is by better informing the search engines about how relevant the content on your website is to the questions that people are asking. So really, really important that you know what keywords people are using to find your site, and that your content is relevant and targeted. Okay, content quality. So this is your opportunity. It's really to establish your expertise, to show that you're an authority, and to show that you have trust. So trust is earned when you get backlinks to the site by other people. And so when we talk about a backlink profile, that's kind of where we go. And then in regards to content structure, this is the way your site is laid out, what type of headlines you use, whether you use the search terms in those headlines. Okay. So let's talk now a little bit about clickability. Clickability comes down to when your audience sees your site in the search results, do they engage with it? So what I like to say here is that the first impression of your website happens before anybody ever sees your website. Let's take a quick look at some examples here. So which would you be more likely to click, this or this? So the answer is clearly the second one. It's got keywords in there. It's got calls to action. It has a better description that really explains and entices people to click through and visit your website. Here's another example of that. We could do a simple one like that, and I have seen lots of those. Or we can make the change. We can put the keywords in there and allow people to find us with the searches they're using. And it does make a huge difference. So this is what's called a meta title. And then this area here is called a meta description. While we're talking about this, I do want to put a quick note in here about schema. Now, schema can get very technical, and we could actually do, excuse me, we can actually do an entire webinar on this. But I do want to touch on it because this is code that we put on the back of your website to essentially spoon feed Google and tell them what your website is about. And that in turn helps the people searching to get more information about your website. So it can sometimes result, oops, sorry about that, in what results in what's called a rich snippet. So you've probably seen these, again, in the 0 position there. I'm going to move my mouse off of that so it stops happening. And this is really what comes up, not in the rankings, but what Google calls a feature or a rich snippet, and people click on it and are able to go to your website. This also comes up in the form of people also ask and other formats there. It could be a video carousel, a recipe carousel, all kinds of things here. So the more we feed them, the better off we are. So let's talk a little bit about conversion and what's the most important factor of converting people. When we say conversion, we want people to come to your website, to click through and either sign up for a newsletter or purchase a product or engage further or set a tour up for a multifamily property. So we want them to engage more with your website. So the most important factor here is really understanding who's your audience, what motivates them, how can you fix the elements on your website, like the buttons and the headlines and the colors and all the different factors that go into that in order to move them along and help them get to the next page. And sometimes you have to do more than one path for different personality types. So again, this comes down to content hierarchy and structure through headings and bulleted lists and different tables. It comes down to providing really detailed information about your products and events, including the images and videos that are gonna be interesting and motivating to the people that are searching for you, putting internal links to other pages that are important to what they're looking for, and most importantly, calls to action, buttons and links that encourage them to take an action. So when you know what appeals to your website visitors, you can actually design your content to motivate them, and that's what that comes down to. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a shameless plug here. We have a program that we've recently launched at Results for Peak called the CRO, or Conversion Rate Optimization Program, where we do A/B testing, and we really help you to understand your audience, build a profile, and to test different elements to make sure that people are converting better. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to ask and reach out to me about that. All right, so we're getting towards the end of my content here, and what I like to do is really a final thought. So I like to think of a website as a machine, and it needs to be kept tuned, like a race car or some other a really good Rolex watch or something like that. It really needs to be like updated and finely tuned. The other is like a good recipe. I know it took my grandmother years to develop her chicken soup recipe, and she passed it to me, but not my brother, which I'm really happy about. But it took years to perfect and really learn that. The same is true of your website. Right. So you may recall that a couple of weeks ago, Kevin Whitbeck did a webinar on the tools that you can use. Now, these are really important to gain all the information that we were talking about, that we can apply to the factors and really get to understand what's going on in your website. So I highly encourage you to take a look back at the YouTube channel and to read this article that he put up there, because that is very relevant to what we're talking about. Everything is interconnected here. Okay, so I know I went through this fast. And thank you for your time and your attention. And now I'm going to open it up to any questions that you may have. And I think we're doing well on time here.
Yeah, we're doing great. Thanks, David. This was awesome. We do have some questions in the chat, so I'll pass those over. Someone asked, what are the recommended formats and sizes for images on the website? I think that's a really good question if you want to touch on that a little bit.
Okay, so it really depends on where the placement is and what you're doing there. We can definitely send you some information on the standard banners and all of that, and get the actual sizes. But it depends on what you have for a banner and what you're trying to develop, because a hero image, or one of the big images at the top, is going to be a lot different than say an image that you use just as a descriptor or something there. What I can do is send me your email, and I'll make sure I get you a list of the standard sizes that we can send out to you, because there's a lot of different ones.
We can do that. Awesome. Okay, and you also talked about meta titles and meta descriptions. Can you tell us if there is a tool that can help with writing more engaging meta titles and meta, and descriptions?
Yeah, okay, I can definitely do that. Let me go back here. Okay, so can you just repeat that one more time? What was that?
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a tool that can help with more engaging meta titles?
So what I like to do is use Screaming Frog. It's a technical tool, but it has a really good feature called SERP snippets, and it allows you to see what's going to show up on the Google results, and really kind of get a vision of it, and it will tell you if it's too long. You can see the whole thing, your description. It will tell you if it's going to cut off, anything like that. So that's a great tool to be able to see it. As far as writing them, what you want to do is make sure you understand what your keywords are, and incorporate that in a way that's going to be enticing to people. A good way to check out the keywords, and a good tool to use there, would be SEMrush, and they have the Keyword Magic tool. That is a paid tool. If you have a Google Ads account, you can also use their Keyword Planner tool, which is free, but you have to have an account. You don't actually have to be running any ads, so it won't cost you anything if you do it that way, but you do have to have a Google Ads account to do that, but that can be helpful. The other thing I want to say is you want to write it in a way that's going to be, like I said, enticing, that's going to get people's attention, and that's going to ask them to do something. For instance, at Results Repeat Digital Marketing Agency, our experts can help you with SEO, pay-per-click, learn how we can help. Something along those lines, as long as it fits within the constraints of the character limits, which the Screaming Frog can help you with, then you'll do well there.
Yeah, and Screaming Frog does have a free version, which I use every day. And I know some people on our team have the paid version, some people use the free version. And I think for a lot of people who are novice, SEO, maybe you are a marketing person at your company or an owner, the free version is probably enough for your needs. David, someone asked or said, I heard that Google really controls the schema markup. Is this true?
So not that I'm aware of. They do have a lot of things that they allow or don't allow in this. And it's really important to test any markup you're putting on your site. There are some plugins that write it. It may not necessarily be as clean as if you have somebody who understands how to do it, write it. But there's a couple of tools that you can use. If you go and Google the Google Rich Results tool, you can put your URL in there and it will show you what it sees and what you're eligible for. Or you can just drop the code part in and it will read it and kind of tell you what it'll come up as for rich results. Now that doesn't guarantee you're going to actually get the result. It depends what the competitors are doing there. But the more you give them, the more, and the cleaner that schema code is, the more likely you are to get that kind of result. It gives lots of information to Google about your website and your products.
Cool. So you mentioned, you talked a lot about title tags or meta titles, and then content headings. What are ways that you would optimize those to improve the site's ability to rank?
Okay, so content headings, I like to think of it almost like a title of a book and subtitles. So think of each page on your website as a book. Each one generally should have one main idea that it's about. And we call that the H1 tag. There is some debate as to whether or not the number that you use is important, but as long as it's in these header tags, according to Google, they'll get the information. Another way to optimize them, if you can, and if it doesn't sound really bad to the end user, so when you read it aloud, if it doesn't sound bad, try to use your target key phrase towards the beginning of the heading. It does have more weight there. So if you can get that in front. But if it sounds really bad and it looks weird when you read it, then it's still important to have it in there towards the end or get it going that way. So remember, the golden rule is if the user can't make sense of it, or if it's not a good read to the user, you want to do that. Then moving along, you want to separate your page into the subtopics. So if you have one thing that you're going to talk about digital marketing per se, you might have an H2 tag that talks about SEO. You might have another H2 tag that talks about pay-per-click, another one that talks about social media. And then under that H2 tag for SEO, for instance, we might break it down into sections. One that talks about title tags, one that talks about headers. Those would be H3 tags, things like that. So that has a couple of different effects. One is it breaks up the content, makes it easier to skim and easier to read for the end user. It also tells Google a lot about the context of it. And one thing that we've been discussing recently is that, let's say you have a section that's a photo gallery or something like that. By putting a heading right above that photo gallery that talks about what the photos are of, you're actually giving Google some context in those photos and giving them more information about what the site is about. So it's lots of little ways, little subtle ways that you get this information out there that can make a difference.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Just one more question. So unless anybody has another one, please feel free to toss it into the chat now. But one person asked, is the image and scaling a key factor for crawlers or ease of use? I think instead of like the actual images, if you want to talk about like image size and like site speed, that might be useful to answer.
Yeah, so you nailed it there when you talked about site speed and how it goes to user experience. So when you're scaling an image, if the image is compressed and you load it up in the size that you intend to use, it's less work for the server, the hosting server, to load, and it's going to move much faster. So indirectly, yes, it affects page speed. It makes for a better user experience. and it's going to ultimately help you in that, because anything over 4 seconds is essentially too long for a load time for a website, even though there is different theories about that. So the faster you can make it, and images are probably one of the biggest factors there, the better off you're going to be.
Okay, another question. Someone is a buzzer beater. I love it. All right. Is there any difference in SEO when you have a scrolling web page, which I think they mean, you know, the page that seems to go on and on forever, lots of information, versus a website with multiple pages?
Okay, so this is something that is debated by SEOs often. Personally, I prefer sites that have multiple pages. And the reason why is because it really gives you the ability to target using the keywords a little bit better, and to really have one H1 tag and do that. However, that's not to say that you can't rank well with a single page. If you use the header structure properly and you really break it up and get your key phrases into those header sections and separate it out and give as much information as you can, then you should rank well. I know there are SEO people out there that will disagree with me as far as they prefer the single page. But like I said, I think the multiple page one is better, as long as it's easy to navigate and easy for people to find what they're looking for.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I have everyone's questions. So, you know, unless anybody tosses one in, I did have one person who's a current customer ask a really specific question. So I will reach out to you directly just to answer a question about your website and what you need. But if you have any questions, you know, you're thinking about this later, feel free to reach out to David or me. It's david@resultsrepeat.com, and I'm carissa@resultsrepeat.com. You'll receive an email from us, of course, with a link to our YouTube page where you can catch this recording and all of our other recordings. And in that email, we'll include all the links that David shared, as well as his PowerPoint slides. So you'll have all the information right there. You can reach out to us anytime if you have any other questions. So thank you everyone so much for attending. Thank you, David, for your awesome presentation and Q&A. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.